Hey everybody, welcome back into the Frogs Up TCU Sports Podcast. I'm Russ Hodges, that is Anthony North. We are back recording here Sunday evening, January 21st. We have a full slate of TCU basketball content to discuss this evening. TCU men's basketball dropping a pair of Big 12 games this past week. TCU losing on the road to Cincinnati, 81-77 in overtime. The Cincinnati fans rushing the court, perhaps the first time ever that TCU has been court rushed in men's basketball. We will break that game down and talk about what happened down the stretch and why TCU was not able to close this one out. We will also break down the game that occurred at Schallmeyer Arena yesterday evening. TCU falling at home for the first time this season, losing to Iowa State 73-72. Trey Tennyson hits a three-pointer at the end of the second half to make it a 1-point game, but Iowa State wins without its star player, Tamin Lipsey, who did not play due to a shoulder injury. Again, we will talk about that game, what went wrong for TCU, and how the Frogs can bounce back now as they fall to 2-3 in the conference and 13-5 overall on the season. TCU women's basketball has been in the news this past week. A flurry of updates regarding all of the injuries that have really hamstrung the program. We have players going on TikTok giving updates. We have statements coming out from the athletic director. We have open tryouts being held for walk-ons. We have multiple season-ending injuries. It's been a mouthful for women's basketball, and thankfully the team is scheduled to play against UCF on Tuesday, but this comes after both the Kansas State and Iowa State game were canceled this past week, which is a rarity. It's a very bizarre time for TCU women's basketball right now, but we will break all of that down. And we also have a couple of updates at the end of the podcast, some non-rev sports that are back in action. Cam Norrie making a big run at the Australian Open, and this should be a good episode tonight. I had a pretty solid weekend myself, went up to Wisconsin, got to spend some quality time with my family, brother and his wife, and had a chance to meet my new nephew for the first time. He's about 2 months old, and really enjoyed that time with him. And we went out and watched the Packers 49ers game, and he and I, being Bears fans, we really enjoyed the night out. It was a win-win. The bar was giving out free lemon drops for every Packer touchdown, and whenever the Niners would score, we kind of reveled in that as Bears fans. So it was a solid night, and had a little bit of better weather as well. It's no longer single digits. Gosh, I was driving out to cover a basketball game Friday night, and it was about -5 when I got back to my apartment. And my schedule has been thrown off with a bunch of cancellations and postponements due to the weather. So feels good to be back into a regular rhythm, and hopefully we'll get some better weather this week as well. So it was a solid weekend for me and Anthony. Hopefully it was a solid weekend for you as well.
Yeah, it was a pretty nice weekend. It did get some good basketball news. My son, his second grade little rec league team, they had a really great game, and he had a good game. He had his best game of the season and got a few buckets out there. So I did get to see some good basketball in Fort Worth this weekend. Some of the actual good basketball news out here. Wasn't much of it coming from the TCU side, so at least we got that. Do have some kind of I don't know, cough, cold situation going through the house. It seems to have caught up with me a little bit. Hopefully it doesn't ruin our audio too bad. I'm rocking a cough drop right now, so hopefully that's not like clanking against my teeth on the audio. But we're going to get through this. There's a lot of big news to talk in Horned Frog universe here, so happy to get into it.
Yeah, and before we do, we will share an update from Charlie Hustle. Our sponsorship with Charlie Hustle will be continuing into 2024. We are finalizing some details with them right now, but in the meantime, Charlie Hustle has dropped a new TCU basketball hoodie. If you want to check that out, you can go to charliehustle.com or check out our posts on Facebook and Twitter at Frogs of War. We have our promo code Frogs of War gets you 15% off that purchase. So if you're looking for another TCU hoodie to add to your closet, be sure to go to charliehustle.com and check that out. They always make great stuff. So with that, we'll go ahead and tip off this podcast tonight with TCU men's basketball going to Cincinnati for a big Big 12 road game. Bearcats coming in, having already beaten BYU on the road, almost beat Baylor in Waco, a very good team that was favored to win this game by 3.5 points. TCU came in as an underdog despite cracking the top 25 as the number 19 team in the country. Anthony, I know you said that Cincinnati would probably be favored to win, and this was a game where TCU certainly had its opportunities in the first half as well as late in the second half. I'll fast forward to the latter portion of the second half here. TCU had a 60-53 lead with about 6 minutes to go and really had an opportunity to close this out if they could just execute some of the basics. But free throw shooting was abysmal for TCU. In regulation, they were 2 for 8 on free throws, and thankfully Cincinnati was just as bad, despite the fact Cincinnati shot over twice the number of free throws that TCU did. Cincinnati only made about 50% of their free throws, and TCU finished 6 for 12, but 2 for 8 in regulation. Micah Peavy missed a couple of free throws down the stretch. Ernest Uday missed, I think, 3 free throws down the stretch, and it was just not a slop. It was a sloppy execution from the Frogs down the stretch. Avery Anderson really struggled to handle the ball in this game. He had 6 turnovers, including a couple of really silly turnovers down the stretch that led to fast break points for the Bearcats. He got benched over the last couple of minutes of the game. Jameer Nelson came in. Nelson finished 6 for 15 from the field, 1 for 5 from 3. Also struggled with turnovers. He had 4 in the game, and TCU just kind of let Cincinnati back into it by the end of the second half. Bearcats made a couple of big shots, a big three-pointer from the corner to take the lead. Trey Tennyson came up huge down the stretch, had 17 points in the game, 6 of 12 shooting, including a big three-pointer over the last minute of the game, knocked down a huge shot to give TCU a 2-point lead. Cincinnati's able to tie it on a tough layup, and then kind of a bizarre sequence down the stretch as TCU misses a shot. Cincinnati gets the rebound, and then Avery Anderson commits a really dumb foul with the Bearcats in the bonus to send them to the free throw line on a foul 90 feet away from the basket. Thankfully, Cincinnati did not make the free throws. They missed both of them. Ernest Uday gets the rebound. He gets fouled with 2 seconds to go with an opportunity to give TCU a 1-point lead, and he misses the front end of a 1-and-1. And it ultimately concludes at the end of regulation tied at 67, but the Bearcats really just kind of took over in overtime. They were knocking down three-pointers. They were knocking down tough shots around the basket, some tough layups, and TCU just could not get any rhythm going offensively down the stretch. TCU made 1 field goal over the final 5.5 minutes of the game. That was the Trey Tennyson three-pointer. Almost everything was in the half court. TCU was really struggling to get out in transition. Only 13 fast break points for TCU in this game. Cincinnati really did a good job of preventing TCU from running, and the ball pressure was also very tough for TCU's guards. They struggle. Again, Jameer Nelson, Avery Anderson combined for 10 turnovers, and the Frogs just unfortunately let one get away. The fans rushed the court as the final buzzer sounded in overtime. It was the first Big 12 home win for Cincinnati, and a very emotional game. Some very questionable officiating down the stretch on both sides, but a big win for Cincinnati. I personally was not a huge fan of the court storm, but TCU has not been court stormed probably ever in men's basketball, so I guess it's a little bit of
now
a
we've made it.
compliment. Yeah, and I think I just gotta I gotta be less of a boomer and accept that court storming is happening much more than it used to, and just got to move on there. And the players had to move on as well because you had a tough game coming up right around the corner against Iowa State. So ultimately, just from my standpoint, watching this game, this felt like a game where if TCU could just execute down the stretch, handle the ball, knock down free throws, it would have been a win for the Frogs. But it's a tough learning experience, and it's very difficult to win on the road in the Big 12. So it definitely felt like a big missed opportunity for TCU to let this one slip away.
There's really no reason for TCU to have lost this game. The way this game played out, TCU led for over 37 minutes of game time. Had stretches where they were dominant, opened this game, sprinted out to an 11-point lead midway through the first half, and that just they went through these streaks of scoring droughts that were half court offense wasn't working, shots weren't falling, turnovers abound, missed free throws. You mentioned the missed free throws, just killer missed free throws in this game. But to have that 11-point lead dwindled down to a 1-point game at halftime, then you build it back up again in the second half. You come out kind of on fire. You had chances to put this team away, to send that crowd, a very active, excited crowd, send them home early, shut them down, shut them up early, and walk away with the win. And TCU just wasn't able to do that. TCU, so there were several points in this game, and there were you mentioned the Avery Anderson turnover. There was a particularly bad Avery Anderson turnover that was TCU was leading. I don't know, it was 4 or 7 or something, and it leads to a breakaway score on the other end, and it was a big turning point in the game. And that was a possession where TCU scores there. I mean, it's close to being curtains.
Mm-hmm.
The flip that at that point in the game to give away an immediate score when just lazy pass in the backcourt. You're just kind of whipping the ball around, and I don't know if TCU was just not ready for the length of this Cincinnati team. Those Cincinnati guards were really, really impressive. I think they were better than I expected them to be. I going into this game thought it was going to be the big guys. They've got two big guys, very talented, strong scorers. And, Lakin scored 11 points. The guy who I was most afraid of, and that's a pretty good game, but he was not the dominant force that Day Thomas and Skillings and Newman, those guys just really took it to the Horned Frogs, outplayed Emmanuel Miller and by far outplayed Avery Anderson and Jameer Nelson in this one. I think it's one TCU's going to look back on as, when the conference standings come down, it's going to be a tight race to the finish to see who finishes in the top 4 and gets those buys in this new conference tournament outlook that the conference released, where the top 4 teams get a double bye, and the bottom 4 teams have like a play-in game. So you really want to avoid that bottom 4, and you really want to be in that top 4. So every game is going to be hugely important. We're going to look back on this one as a painful one, I think.
Yeah, the turnovers were really troubling in this game. I think that was perhaps my biggest takeaway was TCU finished with 19 turnovers in this one, which was a season high prior to the Iowa State game, where turnovers were once again a enormous issue. But the way Cincinnati was able to pressure the ball down the stretch, you mentioned Newman. He was a menace defensively down the stretch. He was clamping Jameer Nelson. He was
Mm-hmm.
clamping Avery Anderson. And those two players did not shoot the ball well in this game either. Nelson off the bench was 6 for 15, 1 for 5 from three. He also had a 3-point shot late in this game where he's at the elbow, he has the ball, and Cincinnati is just crowding the paint underneath the basket, daring him to shoot the ball. And he ultimately takes the shot after hesitating a little bit and bricks it badly. Um, Cincinnati just played with more energy down the stretch. It just felt like they were doing everything a step quicker than TCU was. It felt like the Frogs were really struggling to find any room to operate offensively. Emmanuel Miller was very quiet in this game. TCU tried to get him the ball down the stretch in the mid-range area, down on the block, and there was just nothing happening there. And what was really troubling as well was in overtime, Cincinnati didn't have its big 7-footer who came off the bench and gave them really good minutes. He fouled out on kind of a ticky-tack call. I mentioned the officiating was frankly pretty awful both ways in this game. But the Bearcats were without their 7-footer who did a tremendous job throughout most of the game. They didn't have him down the stretch, but they knocked down threes. They had a player, it might have been Day Thomas, who's about 25% from 3-point range, knocked down a big one from the corner late in regulation. So yeah, I agree with you 100%. This is a game that TCU is probably going to look back on and say that this is one that we should have had. But I think the big takeaway for me again was the turnovers, because if you remember after the Houston game, the way TCU executed down the stretch, playing without a timeout over the last roughly 5 minutes of the game, and Jamie Dixon told the players in the locker room, he said, "You guys are the smartest team in the country," and they played very smart basketball down the stretch of that game, and that's why they were able to win. In this game, it was the exact opposite. The lazy passes that resulted in turnovers and fast break points for Cincinnati, the inability to make free throws, 2 for 8, that comes out to 29%. That's unacceptable by any standard, even at the high school level. You can't win games when you're that bad shooting free throws. Perhaps the Cincinnati crowd played a role in that, but uh, the turnovers, TCU cannot continue to turn the ball over at this rate. And we'll be getting into the Iowa State game here shortly, where turnovers were again really bad. But the ball handling is something I'm genuinely becoming concerned about, because I guess if we can segue here into Iowa State, Anthony, unless you have any other thoughts about the Cincinnati game, because I really want to get into these turnovers here and why it's such a big issue.
No, I think these two games really tie together. I mean, the issues that we saw in the Cincinnati game just got kind of blown out on even a larger scale in the Iowa State game. So yeah, I think it you kind of end up talking about both games. So yeah, let's go ahead and jump into it.
All right, absolutely. So TCU returns home yesterday afternoon for a top 25 matchup. Iowa State coming in as the number 24 team in the country and playing without its star player, Tamin Lipsey, who was out with a shoulder injury, averages about 14 and a half a game with 5 rebounds, 5 assists, over 3 steals a game. Extremely dynamic player. TCU ultimately, by the time the game tipped off, was a 5-point favorite. The line shifted quite a bit when it was announced that Lipsey was not going to play. But if you watched Iowa State for the first time, you would not even realize that he wasn't on the floor, because the way the Cyclones came out, they dominated the first half of this basketball game. Uh, I frankly was so frustrated that I turned the game off at halftime. I understand that TCU was able to rally in the second half, but to put some context into this discussion as to why I was so frustrated, TCU opened the game with back-to-back turnovers from Avery Anderson, who was immediately sent to the bench.
Yes.
TCU turned the ball over 9 times in the first 6 minutes of the game. They finished with 18 turnovers in the first half. I don't know if I've ever seen a game
First half.
where TCU or any team in any level turned the ball over 18 times in one half. That's just flat out bizarre. TCU finishes the game with 27 turnovers, which is not only a season high, it's the most turnovers in a game under Jamie Dixon. And I believe it's also a program record by one. Uh,
Yeah,
Historic.
I'll go ahead and jump in there because I went and I did my own research on this one. So at least as far back as the 2000-2001 season, which is as far back as GoFrogs.com kept stats available online. Uh, this is the most. The next closest was in 2015-16 season, which is prior to Jamie Dixon's arrival. TCU had 26 turnovers each against Washington and West Virginia that season, both games on the road. They hadn't had, I think it was maybe since like 2000, a home game with anywhere approaching this many turnovers is not really ever happened. There's, in the Jamie Dixon era, it's a total of 9 games with 20 or more turnovers total since the 2016-17 season when Jamie Dixon took over. So this was an anomaly, but in a very extreme program worst, at least that in modern stat keeping history available on College Basketball Reference or through TCU.
And Iowa State was punishing TCU for every single turnover. It felt like every time the Frogs turned the ball over, and it wasn't just one or two guys, by the way. Avery Anderson finished with 7 turnovers. Jameer Nelson finished with 5. Emmanuel Miller finished with 4. Ernest Uday had 3, I believe. Xavier Cork, in 4 minutes off the bench, had 3 turnovers. Micah Peavy was the only starter who did not have a turnover in this game. And Iowa State was scoring layups. They were hitting 3-pointers off of these turnovers. Iowa State finished with 36 points off turnovers. Nearly all of those came in the first half. Iowa State had a 44-26 lead at halftime. Fittingly, the first half ended with a out-of-bounds play from TCU that resulted in a turnover inside the three-point line and a run out for the Cyclones. A layup right before the buzzer. TCU finds itself down by 18 after the first half. And somehow the Frogs were able to work their way back into this game, and a couple of runs in the second half brought it to 4. Trey Tennyson, again, was very solid offensively. He finished with 19 points in this game. This was after he scored 17 on 6 of 12 shooting against Cincinnati, which included that big 3-point shot late in that game. He's really emerging as not just a very good shooter. He is perhaps the most dynamic scorer that TCU has right now. He's making tough shots. He's knocking down shots from various areas of the floor, and he may very well be the guy that TCU features offensively out of the backcourt moving forward, because he was a big reason why the Frogs were able to mount a comeback. I think Miller knocked down a couple of shots as well. And TCU found itself in a position at home. The fans who were actually booing the team at halftime were getting into the game. The fans were getting very excited. The blackout in the crowd, and to just kind of a sequence late in this game that really encapsulated the struggles early on. Jacoby Coles sets a good screen. He catches a pass at the top of the 3-point line for a wide open triple, bricks it off the backboard. I don't even know if the shot hit iron. Emmanuel Miller gets the offensive rebound. TCU was fantastic rebounding the ball in this game, 40-26. the rebounding advantage 22-11 on the defensive end. Emmanuel Miller gets the offensive rebound, spins to his right, misses a 5-footer. Micah Peavy gets another offensive rebound, goes for a putback from 3 feet, misses it, and Iowa State gets the rebound, and that was pretty much the game. And what led to this as well was the Cyclones missed the front end of a 1-and-1, and they also missed the front end of a 1-and-1 again in the final seconds as TCU got the ball, passed it up to Tennyson. He put up a 3 as the buzzer went off. It was good. It made it a 1-point game, but ultimately it was not enough as the final score, again, 73-72. The Cyclones beat the Horned Frogs in Fort Worth, the first home loss of the season for TCU. Jamie Dixon talked after the game about how disappointed he was with the team's effort given the circumstances. Home game. He talked about how a goal for the team this year was to not lose any home games. And I mean, a reason for that is it's so tough to win on the road in this conference. I think after Tuesday night against Cincinnati, Big 12 teams on the road were 7-18. And that includes all of the ranked teams in the conference. I mean, Kansas lost a road game to UCF. Like, it's going to be very difficult to win on the road. So these home games are super crucial. And this was a game where, I mean, you have every reason to come out and put on a good show for the home fans. It was a great crowd. Iowa State coming in without a key piece, and this team just did not look like they were ready to play. And before we got into the discussion segueing into this game, I mentioned the turnovers. I've talked about turnovers a lot. But part of me thinks Iowa State must have seen something on film, or maybe they watched the final 10 minutes of the TCU Cincinnati game, because they were very aggressive defensively in the way they pressured the ball. And to look at the stats, Avery Anderson and Jameer Nelson, they combined for 10 turnovers in 10 turnovers in the Cincinnati game, 12 turnovers combined in this Iowa State game. That's 22 turnovers from your top 2 point guards over the last 2 games. That can't happen moving forward. I mean, it's plain and simple. These 2 guys are veteran players. They've been around for a while. They've proven that they can play at a very high level. But if they continue to turn the ball over like this, TCU is not going to win many games in the conference. The ball security, particularly in the backcourt, has to improve moving forward. And that was a big takeaway for me from this Iowa State game. Is it just kind of feels like that's the most glaring problem with this team right now, is the ball security in the backcourt has to be better moving forward. It was nice to see TCU have a better free throw shooting performance. They were 20 for 26. That's 77%. A shout out to Ernest Uday as well, because he went 8 for 8 on free throws in this game, and he was very active. He's really played well over the last couple of games. He was very aggressive on the offensive glass against Cincinnati, had a couple of big putbacks in that one. He's been rebounding the ball very well. Frankly, he's the only productive big man that TCU has right now. Xavier Cork in 9 minutes against Cincinnati had 0 points, 0 rebounds, 0 assists, 0 steals, 0 blocks. In 4 minutes against Cincinnati, he had 3 turnovers with 0 points, 0 rebounds, 0 assists. Isam Mustafa has not scored in each of his last 3 games. So it's been very nice to see Ernest Uday step up and be aggressive on the offensive glass and make an impact with a couple of those other guys really struggling. But Anthony, as you watch this game, what frustrated you the most about this game, and what do you feel is just kind of the biggest issue that this team is facing right now that maybe these last 2 games have shown us?
Well, the thing that frustrated me most about this game is it really felt like TCU had no intention of playing this game. They came out like they were hungover, like they had. It was like they were going to walk over this team.
Mhm.
Similar to the way the football team came out against Colorado or something like that, where this is a team that, they're missing their best player, we're favored, and we're going to walk out there in front of our crowd and we're going to roll over. And that just obviously wasn't the case. TCU, like you said, came out, immediately turned the ball over twice, immediately looked like they were deer in the headlights. And it's troublesome because it's 2 consecutive games of this where turnovers are such a problem, and it obviously was worse here. I think Iowa State's coach TJ Otzenberger clearly has something on Jamie Dixon. I think he's got his number a little bit. I think the Cyclones swept TCU last season, and I think this is the only game that they play against each other this season. So that's 2 straight seasons sweeping the Horned Frogs. This is a game TCU again should have won. Man, so 50 points Iowa State scored off of either second chance opportunity or points off turnovers.
Mm-hmm.
That's out of 73 for the game. I mean, if TCU was, I guess the final totals on rebounding look okay. And they end up dominating the rebound total, but TCU, when Iowa State was getting those offensive rebounds, they were scoring. They were either grabbing them and dishing it back out for a 3, or they were putting it right back in the basket. So TCU needs to clean up that piece of the game. In addition to the turnovers, I mean, some of these turnovers were so sloppy. Like, you do not see turnovers like this at this level of basketball. The way TCU played last week, really, you don't see turnovers like this in the Big 12. You don't see turnovers like this across Division I basketball. They were really, really sloppy. The bad inbounds plays, just bad ball movement at the point of attack, bad, slow, rainbow passes, things that you would teach grade school kids not to do. I think it was as bad a performance, particularly in the first half, as we've seen out of a TCU team, certainly under Jamie Dixon. I think it was an embarrassing performance in the first half. And yeah, the final score comes down as a 1-point game. But that TCU was only able to turn it on in the final minutes, I think it's very scary. It's a Jekyll and Hyde thing too, because we talked about last week how good this team was, and you mentioned this, how good this team was controlling things down the stretch against Houston. Mm-hmm. An extremely good defensive team that pressures the ball and forces you to do things in a different way, and TCU handled that. And here they are getting completely run out of the gym by Iowa State. It's just a really rough look. I think, Xavier Cork to have in the last 2 games play 12 minutes, 0 points, 3 fouls, 3 turnovers, 1 rebound. Oh man. TCU needs more out of Xavier Cork. Clearly needs more out of Isa Mustafa as well. I think you mentioned Uday. Really, I have to second your shout out on the free throw shooting, because he had that opportunity to win the game in Cincinnati from the free throw line. He misses it, and he comes back the next game and makes 8 straight. And I think that was very impressive. He clearly, it's important to him to improve that piece of his game, and he took that to heart. So you have to like that kind of a silver lining. Excuse me. But I think we're going to talk about how this leads into this next week. I mean, TCU has what should be one of its easiest games on the schedule against Oklahoma State, but it's on the road. It's at Stillwater. And, if there's any level of crowd at Gallagher-Iber, that is a very difficult place to play. TCU might be favored by like a bucket, maybe under 2 possessions, I bet, against a team that is, sub 500 overall for the season. That is now a must win game. You can't lose that game. And then you go at Waco, at Baylor this coming weekend. I mean, things can really, really snowball in a hurry. And so we have to hope, excuse me, we have to hope that TCU turns this around going into this game in Stillwater.
Yeah, I think that's a good segue for as we move forward, Oklahoma State and Baylor coming up on the schedule. We've talked a lot about the turnovers, of course. I think Trey Tennyson is going to be a continued factor offensively. The way that he's been shooting the ball has been really fun to watch. I think he's early in the season, I talked about how he needed to be a starter and how his shooting just kind of unlocks this TCU offense in the half court setting. His play is going to be so important over these next several games because TCU has had some issues getting out on the fast break. As we saw in non-conference play, TCU was excellent in getting out in transition, scoring points off the fast break. But these last couple of weeks, it's been a bit of a struggle. And of course, some of that might be due to a increased athleticism and talent level playing in this conference. But Trey Tennyson may be the guy in the half court that TCU has to really run its offense through because he's been efficient from the 3-point line. He's been efficient on his free throws, and he's been pretty good in the mid-range area as well. He hasn't turned the ball over as much as Anderson and Nelson have. So I've been really impressed with Trey Tennyson, and I think he's going to need to be your guy that can get you a bucket when you need it, because as I've watched these last couple of games, watching TCU in the half court, I feel like putting Tennyson aside, TCU has really struggled to find someone that can get them a bucket when they absolutely need it. When the offense breaks down and it's late in the clock, the ball's being held out well beyond the 3-point line. Who's the guy that can be kind of like a cheat code for you? Mike Miles Jr. was that guy last season. He was that guy 2 years ago. Even at times last year when Mike Miles was hurt, Damian Baugh knocked down some big shots. I really haven't seen that from Nelson or Anderson consistently in Big 12 play. Miller, I think, is theoretically the guy that should be that. But to credit Cincinnati and really to credit Iowa State, they've done a nice job against it. Miller had, I think, just 10 points in the Iowa State game. He was 3 for 8 shooting and also didn't have a good shooting percentage against Cincinnati. So TCU really needs to get its half-court offense rolling here because the fast break points just haven't been coming the way that they were early in the season. So hopefully we can see that against Oklahoma State on Tuesday. Really hope that the turnovers get cleaned up. I'm not sure if we'll see a lineup change. I mean, I would say bench Anderson, put Nelson back in the starting lineup, but he hasn't been very good handling the ball either. So I don't know if you just continue to roll with Avery Anderson and hope that he can bounce back and start taking better care of the ball. But you're right on the money, Anthony. I agree 100%. This Oklahoma State game, if you lose this game, you're in real trouble. Because I mean, even after Baylor, you got to play Texas Tech. It's going to be really, really challenging over these next few weeks. Should TCU not be able to pull out this win in Stillwater, so hopefully TCU can get it done. Again, I think the Frogs have rebounded the ball pretty well. I think Ernest Uday has been much improved over the last couple of games. I love how active he's been on the offensive side because he's not really the kind of player that is going to be a featured low post option. He's going to be more of a hustle guy, and he's been making those hustle plays over the last couple of games, which has been nice to see. Xavier Cork and Isam Mustafa, someone please do something. We've talked about Cork a lot over the last couple of years and how he'll have a solid game here and then kind of disappear for a week, and then he'll have another solid performance, then he'll disappear again. He's kind of a vanishing act right now, the way he's performed the last couple of games. We've seen him do much better, so hopefully he can bounce back. And then Mustafa, I gotta admit, I'm a little disappointed with what I've seen from Isam Mustafa so far. I thought he was going to be much more effective on the offensive end. I wasn't expecting a whole lot defensively, but given his track record as a borderline double guy coming over from Coastal Carolina as a 2 or 3 year starter, to not score a point over the last 3 games and to, I think, only have 6 rebounds over the last 3 games, that's not going to cut it. TCU's been rolling with a rotation that features 3 big guys. Mustafa and Cork have been kind of splitting those backup center minutes, and somebody needs to do something. TCU can't continue to move forward with production from just one big guy. And again, Uday has been very solid over the last couple of games, but he can't do it alone. So somebody's got to step up there. Those are kind of my overall thoughts on where things stand for TCU right now. I'm not by any means in panic mode. TCU 13-5 overall, 2-3 in the conference. The season's not over by any stretch. The last couple of games have been frustrating and very disappointing given how the Oklahoma and Houston games went, but TCU could very well bounce back with a big win in Stillwater and then steal a game in Waco and alleviate a lot of these concerns that we're talking about tonight. So,
Yeah.
Anthony, any final thoughts from you here? What are you going to have to see from TCU this week, beginning with the Oklahoma State game on Tuesday?
Yeah, we've gone too long on this, but just to put in context how bad the turnover situation was in this Iowa State game, TCU had a 40%, over 40% turnover rate. That's 40% of possessions ended with a turnover. That is impossibly bad. Oklahoma State is one of the worst turnover teams. They're sub 300 nationally in Division I basketball at turnover rate. They have some of the most turnovers per game, and their turnover percentage is at 20%. So TCU against Iowa State was twice as bad as one of the worst turnover teams in the country. The most turnovers average per game in all of NCAA Division I basketball is 17.4 average turnover number per game. TCU had more than that in the first half against Iowa State. It is a historically bad, impossibly bad performance from TCU. So that's just some context to put on that. But mentioning that with Oklahoma State, we have to see that flip in this game in Stillwater, where TCU gets back to its ways of forcing turnovers from the other team and putting a bad team into bad positions. They need to go out and fully take advantage of Oklahoma State's poor turnover rate. Oklahoma State is also a very slow team as far as their tempo. They're going to try to make this game as low as scoring as possible. They're going to muck it up. And so TCU's ability to get things out on the run is going to be very, very critical here to go and take this game, where Oklahoma State shoots it pretty well from 3. They defend well from 3, but they are a terrible in ball handling and in possession with their turnovers. So TCU must take advantage of that, get back to their ways as one of the best in the country at forcing turnovers and scoring on the fast break. going into Waco's, I mean, that's going to be a really tough game. I think it's one that TCU will be pretty heavy underdogs. Baylor has dropped some games though. They've looked more vulnerable than maybe certainly than I expected. And I think, can you prevent those guys from getting scorching hot from 3-point range? Baylor, one of the best 3-point shooting teams in the country. Can you defend that? I don't know. I mean, they've got some big time stars. They're true freshmen. I think it's going to be a challenge. TCU, a 2-0 week for TCU coming up would be absolutely massive. But this game against Oklahoma State is a must win to really stay alive in your hunt for a March Madness NCAA tournament bid.
Mm. And we will continue to follow the men's team, not only here on Frogs Up, but also on our website, frogsofwar.com. So be sure to check out our website and continue to follow us on our Facebook and Twitter, as well as we continue to recap all of the men's basketball action. We will transition now into TCU women's basketball. And boy, what a week it was for the women's program. We talked on the podcast last weekend about the loss against Houston, where Jaden Owens suffered a serious knee injury. It has been revealed now that she has torn the ACL and meniscus in that injured knee. There was a announcement put out about it by TCU women's basketball. She is done for the season. In addition to that, their backup forward/center, Deja Turner, injured her ankle, I believe, in that Houston game and has to undergo ankle surgery and will also be out for the remainder of the season. Sedona Prince is still out with the fractured finger. Sedona actually put out a TikTok a few days ago where she spent about 2 to 2.5 minutes talking about all of the injuries that have hampered the program over the last few days. And the reason why that was put out, I had to guess, would be because TCU kind of shocked the women's college basketball world by announcing Wednesday they would be canceling the game against Kansas State on Wednesday. They would also be canceling the game against Iowa State that was supposed to be held yesterday. I think the announcement may have actually come earlier than Wednesday, but nevertheless, TCU forced to forfeit 2 conference games, which we are not in COVID world anymore. This is post-pandemic college basketball. To see any sort of cancellation/forfeit is very bizarre. It doesn't happen often. This is the first time I've ever seen it for a major TCU sports program. I'm not including the pandemic. I know TCU a few years ago had a bowl game canceled due to the pandemic and then a COVID outbreak. But TCU women's basketball, 2 ranked opponents coming up on the schedule that will receive forfeit victories. And how that works is TCU's overall record will not be affected, but they will forfeit 2 games in conference. So they automatically fall from 1-4 to 1-6 in the conference. And to make matters worse, TCU put out a announcement that they were going to hold open tryouts for any full-time TCU students looking to walk on to the program for the remainder of the season. Multiple reports. There was a report from Stephen Johnson, who does a great job for the Fort Worth Star Telegram, that TCU was down to 6 scholarship players for the Kansas State game on Wednesday. And the reason for that, in addition to the Deja Turner and Jaden Owens injuries, reportedly multiple players suffered injuries in practice on Tuesday. Sedona Prince said in her TikTok that multiple players are dealing with feet issues. There is another player who stepped away from the team before Christmas to deal with family matters. So TCU was down to 6 scholarship players for the Kansas State game. Jeremiah Donati, TCU athletic director, released a statement because there was a lot of buzz on social media about what actually is going on with the program. Is this truly just a team snake bitten by injuries, or is there something else going on that isn't being reported? You had Kansas State fans coming out on Twitter and criticizing the TCU women's basketball program and poking fun at the nature of the injuries and saying, "Oh, if you've got 6 players, that means you have to play." Blah blah blah, and the tickets weren't going to be refunded. That was also part of the announcement that was put out, and a lot of K-State fans were upset about that. It's been a very hellish last several days for the TCU women's team. There was a little bit of news also that broke today. In light of the open tryouts that were held Thursday and Friday, TCU has added a player to the roster. It is Sarah Sylvester, who is on the women's volleyball team. If you've been listening to Frogs Up since the fall, we talked about TCU women's volleyball quite a bit. And Sarah Sylvester, middle blocker, 6'3", had a great season, set the program record this year, I believe, for most blocks in a match. She is going to now be on the women's basketball team as a dual sport athlete. So that's kind of a fun news bit there. We'll see if she gets actual playing time. I'd be very curious to see how that unfolds. But ultimately, TCU is currently scheduled to play against UCF on Tuesday. So it does not look like any more cancellations or forfeits will be needed, knock on wood. Hopefully no more players get hurt. Madison Connor, Agnes Emma Nopu, Una Jovanovic, Aaliyah Robertson, they are presumably all healthy, ready to go. It's going to be a tight rotation, but just a very, what started out as just very bizarre news has just, it just seems to get worse and worse for this program. And it's just such a shame. The way the season started off, so much positive energy, so much enthusiasm for the program, 14-0, undefeated in non-conference play, beating BYU, hanging tough with a really good Baylor team on the road, but it's really snowballed here and kind of gotten out of control. But Anthony, what was your reaction to all of this news that broke over the last several days, and what are your thoughts on just ultimately where this program stands right now, and can this team even recover from everything that's happened?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, heart breaks for all of the players on this team, to have to forfeit these games, to be in the situation where it's kind of looking like a lost season. Some of these, like Jade Nolan's injury, that's as I understand it, the end of her college career.
Yeah.
Unless she's granted a medical red shirt of some kind. Here, though, having played half of a season, I'm not sure. I think you just you want all these players to get healthy and to do what's best for them, and it is just so unfortunate, the promise that this season was showing early on, for it to all fall apart like this. It is just really unfortunate, and I feel really bad for all the coaches and the players, and want everyone to get healthy again and get right. So that's first thing. Second thing is, man, this is just crazy that TCU has to cancel these games, forfeit conference games against ranked opponents. And I guess one thing to kind of clear up, the reporting that there are 6 scholarship players. There was a lot of social media activity of like, well, don't they have walk-ons? This isn't like the football team where there are, 30 plus walk-ons or, multiple walk-ons at every position. It doesn't work like that. That's not how a college basketball roster is built. The entire roster that's posted on gofrogs.com is 14 players. So if you're saying there's 6 scholarship players, and I've gone through the list and we've had this in our Frogs of War chat, like I don't know how many of the players who are known to be available would not be on scholarship. So I think we're talking about, even if it's 6 players or it's 7 players or at most it's 8 players, like this is not like, oh, well, yeah, they've got this whole other second roster of scout team that's just sitting around ready to go play, Division I college basketball.
Mm-hmm.
That's not realistic. So all of you, man, I think I'm not going to say I'm surprised, but I'm disappointed by particularly the Kansas State fans' reaction on social media. I think it is the lack of empathy, the lack of sympathy, the complete and utter just gross nature of the response of some of these people. It's just like, why? Like I don't understand. You need to take this that seriously. You're getting a free conference win. Take your win and take your rest and move on with the next day. I think that was a really poor showing from that fan base, and I understand that social media is not real life, but it extends into their actual media as well, which I think is also unfortunate. But and to be fair, I don't totally agree that TCU handled this in 100% transparent or the best way possible. I think that more information could have been shared sooner. I think the Sedona Prince TikTok did more to inform the public on the situation than any of the official statements from the school. It's a it's a tricky subject because you can only say so much. Injuries and the nature of injuries are, it's not required public information. If these players share out, then the information's out there, but not everybody is sharing their personal injury information, and that's within their rights. So there is a little bit of a dance around there where you don't want to breach privacy. But I think that it could have been handled at least with, look, here's the situation. Here are people who are hurt. Here's the quantity of additional other people who are hurt. And here's how it happened. And the way that Prince lays it out, it was much more clear than, and that the university was unable to provide a statement of that clarity prior to her social media post. She is a very talented social media personality. She's very, very good at that. And I think her statement said everything without like throwing anybody under the bus or saying anything that wasn't really already known. But she just laid it out so well. So kudos to her. And I'm not really sure the refund situation. I mean, like, honestly, like the tickets are $5 or $6. I don't know why TCU wouldn't just refund the tickets. That makes no sense. There must be some sort of something in the systems or something with revenue sharing in the conference. I don't know. But I do think that TCU could have done a better job in handling this. But at the end of the day, it is this program is suffering through these injuries, and they are working as hard as they can to make the most of it and get back out there on the court this week. And I think everybody here in town should make their best efforts to get out there to Schallmeyer to see him take on UCF, a game that they, even shorthanded, should be very competitive.
Yeah, and if there's a sliver of positive news, Sedona Prince did give an update on her timeline. That's something that we were kind of unsure on, as she had the surgery on that injured finger, and we were kind of wondering what's her timeline looking like. Is she going to be back this year? She said 7 weeks, which I take that as 7 weeks from the day of surgery to getting back on the court. So it sounds like mid to late February is when Sedona Prince will be back. It doesn't sound like it's going to be a season ender, which that's a bit of good news. That Sedona Prince has probably not played her last game at TCU, and of course was phenomenal when she was out there, averaging over 21 points a game, over 10 rebounds, playing like one of the top centers in all of women's college basketball. So that was a bit of good news that it sounds like Sedona Prince will be back at some point this year. And with TCU playing UCF at home, I would be curious to see if head coach Mark Campbell, when he speaks to the media, if he will kind of give his comments on the situation as well, because that's one person we haven't really heard from since all of this went down is the head coach. So I'd be curious to see if any media will be at the game and if they will ask him about that, or if this will just be kind of a story that fades away. But the bottom line here is this team is really running on fumes at the moment with these injuries, and you just hope that there isn't so much pressure now on the remaining healthy players that you see more players go down. That would make a downward spiral even worse, and hopefully TCU can steal a couple games here in the near future. Again, they've gone from 14-0 to 14-4, 1-6 in the conference now. With the 2 forfeits, it's a 6-game conference losing streak. So a win against UCF would feel really good, and you just hope that these players can continue to get healthy. All of the feet issues that are happening right now, hopefully those can be resolved, and we'll see if Sarah Sylvester gets out on the court. I guess she played some high school basketball and averaged about 11 points and 8 rebounds as a high school player. So with that size at 6'3" and that athleticism, that leaping ability, as a middle blocker, maybe she'll do well in blocking some shots for the TCU women's team as they get ready to play UCF. And we'll continue to cover the women's program here on Frogs Up and also at frogsofwar.com. Anthony, any final thoughts on that subject before we transition?
No, that's all. Just looking forward to, here's the start of a Disney movie. Here we go. Let's take a little run here, a win streak, maybe keep this going, get an opportunity in March. Sure would be exciting.
Yeah, and we'll see. It broke a few hours ago, the Sarah Sylvester news. I'm not sure if TCU has added any other players to the roster. Right now, it looks like just one player. So we'll kind of keep our eyes on that as well, and maybe there might be another dual sport athlete coming over from the volleyball team or one of the other women's programs at TCU. So again, hopefully TCU can bounce back with a win against UCF this week. As we'll go ahead and transition out of women's basketball, we have one more item to hit on this evening. Non-rev programs are back in action, and Anthony has a lot of these on the docket here. Anthony, why don't you share with us everything that's going on in the non-rev programs for TCU right now?
Yeah, I'll just roll through it really quick. I mean, everything at TCU is picking back up here in the spring season, so looking forward to some of this stuff really getting rolling. But TCU Rifle sitting at number 2 overall in the rankings, took down number 9 Ohio State earlier this week. So they continue to put up big numbers and be one of the top teams in the country. And as we've come to expect at TCU, TCU women's tennis also got their season started this weekend against Northwestern State, took a 7-0 sweep there. Coming off their last season where they won the NIT tournament, they will be participating in the indoor tournament this year, getting a chance to go down to Texas A&M for ITA Kickoff Weekend, kind of the regional play to get a chance to move into the main bracket. Their first match will be against Rice. And TCU men's tennis gets their season started this week against Abilene Christian. TCU men starting at number 4 overall in the ITA rankings. And this coming weekend, Saturday, begins their ITA indoor tournament kickoff, also taking on Rice, but that is here in Fort Worth. out at the indoor purple courts. So if you are in town this weekend, there will be some really exciting tennis as TCU looks to go for a third straight indoor national championship. And that gets kicked off on Saturday at 2 p.m. out there at the tennis facility. I think that's all thus far of the stuff that's really gotten rolling. I think there's been some track that has been going as well. I don't have any updates on that stuff, but I've seen some of the updates that it's TCU's putting up some big numbers there as well.
And a couple shout outs here before we sign off. I'll start with Imani Bailey, who has accepted an invitation to the Senior Bowl. The TCU running back who declared for the NFL draft participated in the Hula Bowl fairly recently, and he will now compete in the Senior Bowl as well. So that makes 4 TCU football players that will be participating in the Senior Bowl on February 3rd in Mobile, Alabama. Tight end Jared Wiley, cornerback Josh Newton, offensive lineman Brandon Coleman will be joining Imani Bailey there. So that'll be a lot of fun to watch. TCU has had quite a few players in the Senior Bowl over the last year or so, so it'll be exciting to watch some of our Frogs play with their TCU helmets one more time as they hope to hear their names called in the 2024 NFL Draft. Also, former TCU tennis standout Cameron Norrie is on a big run in the Australian Open right now. He is in the final 16. They're probably going to be starting that match here in a couple hours. He has a big matchup against Alexander Zverev. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his last name, but
Zverev?
he's the number 6 player in the nation. Cam Norrie coming in as a top 20 player as well. So that should be a really exciting match to watch. We will probably be asleep by the time that concludes, since they are playing in the land down under. But something to keep an eye on as Cam Norrie looks to make a significant run at that major championship. So with that, I think we will go ahead and sign off for the evening. Again, this is the Frogs Up TCU Sports Podcast. I am Russ Hodges. That is Anthony North. We appreciate all of the support as always, and we appreciate everybody for listening in. Continue to follow us online at frogsofwar.com, posting content there daily. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Frogs of War. And one last time, Charlie Hustle, get that new TCU basketball hoodie. Use that promo code Frogs of War. Get 15% off your purchase, and we should have some more exciting news from Charlie Hustle to share in the near future as we will continue our partnership into 2024. So a lot of exciting things to come. We will be back recording here next weekend. We will have more men's basketball, more women's basketball, maybe even some football. I know it's kind of a quiet week for football, but who knows, with this transfer portal, things can flip in an instant. So we will keep track of that as well. With that, I think we'll go ahead and close it out, and we will close it out with a Frogs Up.
Frogs up.